when a quiet widow hesitantly approaches the forbidden door of her late husband's study, a door she has never crossed in over 50 years. She expects nothing more than old letters and dusty receipts. But as she opens it and discovers a scorched tin containing a secret list of names and cryptic dates, one chilling detail shatters everything she thought she knew about the man she loved. Suddenly, her peaceful existence is upended by a hidden past of espionage, betrayal, and quiet heroism that forces her on a tense, uncertain quest for truth. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe that one hidden secret can change the course of a life, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Marlene always remembered Arthur as the quiet sort, a man who savored life's small pleasures. They first met in the late 1960s, when she was a bright-eyed librarian's assistant in a small English town, and he was a reserved but amiable clerk in a local government office. Back then, he impressed her with thoughtful gestures. An umbrella offered during a sudden rainstorm, an old jazz record passed along because the music suits your smile, or a well-worn spy novel handed to her with a half-joking recommendation. He laughed deeply and easily when amused but never raised his voice in anger. She recalled how he disliked traveling too far from home, claiming the world beyond England's borders was too loud, too messy. It didn't trouble Marlene, who herself had no grand wanderlust. She was content with the town's slow pace, its neat rows of houses, the friendly butcher who greeted everyone by name, the hush of the library's reading alcove. She believed Arthur was simply a homebody who treasured routine. Their wedding was a modest affair at the local church, attended by a handful of friends and distant relatives. Then they settled into a small but cozy bungalow on the outskirts of town. For 52 years, their marriage seemed unremarkably pleasant. No children of their own, but a nurturing presence in the life of a nephew who had lost his parents, and eventually in the life of their grandson by adoption, Elliot. There were no grand dramas, no raised voices behind closed doors. Arthur indulged in daily crossword puzzles, nursed an inexplicable preference for chocolate-covered biscuits, and spent his evenings quietly reading spy thrillers. Sometimes, Marlene teased him about being an armchair James Bond, and he would offer a wry smile and suggest she'd read too many detective stories at the library. When he passed away peacefully in his sleep, just 3 months shy of their 53rd anniversary, she was devastated, but also comforted that he hadn't suffered. She believed she knew all there was to know about him. She had no reason to suspect otherwise. That belief began to crumble 2 days after the funeral. At first, Marlene tried to keep busy, writing thank-you notes to neighbors who brought casseroles and placing sympathy flowers in water. The house felt hollow. The absence of Arthur's mild humming in the hall or the low scratch of his pen against a crossword left a painful hush. On the second afternoon, she found herself standing before the closed door of his study, a place that had always been his sanctuary. For decades, she never questioned the boundary he set. "It's my own little corner, love," he used to say. "Just let me have that." And she, trusting him, obliged. Now the emptiness of the house pressed in, and that door, seemingly innocuous, called to her. She told herself she needed to tidy up his old papers, settle any leftover finances. Heart hammering, she turned the knob. The door opened with a soft creak, revealing a room kept in immaculate order. Shelves lined with worn books, a comfortable armchair beside a small table that held an ancient lamp. She stepped inside, the air faintly musty. A wave of memory hit her. Glimpses of Arthur, slipping inside after dinner, shutting the door to read or gather his thoughts. She moved slowly toward the fireplace, noticing a slight draft. A whisper of cold air came through a narrow gap in the old bricks, as if a hidden channel of wind found its way in. She knelt by the fireplace, running her hand along the hearth. Something felt off. She tapped the iron grate, and it shifted slightly. With a trembling exhalation, she lifted it aside and reached into the ash trap behind it. Her fingers brushed metal. She extracted a small scorched tin box. Her hands shook with apprehension, unsure what she might find. When she pried it open, a stained envelope slid out, wrapped in soot-streaked paper. Her heart pounded as she carefully unfolded the envelope. Inside were 2 folded pages. One page held 10 handwritten names, each followed by a date. 7 of them were crossed out. The second page was blank except for a short note. Check again. No mistakes. Marlene stared at the names, feeling her pulse roar in her ears. She recognized one name, Colin Redford. She remembered him from 1987. A man around Arthur's age who visited their home once, introduced as an old work friend. The day had been unremarkable, just a brief half-hour chat in the living room. After Colin left, Arthur seemed tense. A month later, Marlene read in the local paper that Colin Redford died in a freak boating accident. She recalled Arthur's subdued reaction. He offered few words about it, only a stoic, polite expression of regret. Now, seeing Colin's name with a date preceding his death by a few weeks, Marlene felt a chill stab through her. What did these names signify? The majority were crossed out, their dates around the late 1970s and 1980s. The final 3 names remained uncrossed, their dates blank. Could it be old friends or some kind of accounting ledger? It made no sense. She returned the items to the tin, heart hammering with a dread-laced curiosity. That night, she tossed and turned in bed, haunted by the memory of Colin and the nature of his death. An irrational fear stirred in her. Could Arthur have been involved somehow? The notion was absurd. Arthur was gentle, the type who rescued injured birds in their garden and let them recover in a makeshift box. Yet the tin with that list suggested something sinister. She felt a pang of regret that she hadn't asked him more about his past. Unable to carry the weight alone, she phoned Elliot. He was in his late 20s now, a researcher at a university, specializing in British political and diplomatic history. She told him about the tin, the list of names. At first, Elliot offered rational explanations. Maybe Arthur once worked with these individuals in some obscure government capacity, maybe the dates indicated birthdays or retirements. But he heard the tension in Marlene's voice and agreed to come for a visit. When he arrived, she guided him to the study, letting him see the tin, the list, the second note. Elliot frowned, saying it reminded him of something from the intelligence archives he'd glanced through in the course of his research. He promised to do some investigating, though he warned her not to expect conclusive answers. Some aspects of British intelligence operations remained heavily classified. Over the next week, Elliot delved into old newspapers, public records, even partially declassified British intelligence files available online. He used the names from Arthur's list as search keywords, scouring for patterns in how these people died or vanished. A disquieting pattern emerged. Each of the 7 individuals whose names were crossed out died under unusual circumstances. A car crash, an accidental overdose, a fall from a hotel balcony. The local authorities had each concluded the deaths were unfortunate accidents or suicides. Yet the cluster of such accidents seemed improbable. Elliot showed Marlene a spreadsheet. The time of death for each corresponded suspiciously close to the date next to their name on Arthur's list. Marlene's stomach churned. The scenario forming in her mind felt impossible. Was Arthur some sort of assassin? But how? He was the man who disliked traveling, who rarely left their quiet town. Yet Elliot reminded her that Arthur could have gone on trips without telling her. Or perhaps his reluctance to travel was an elaborate ruse. He might have made short, secret journeys using official cover. The notion outraged her sense of who Arthur had been. She recalled how he was never controlling or secretive in daily life, but he guarded that locked study. At times, he had quietly stepped out for an evening walk, not returning for an hour or 2. Had it been more than that? As Elliot dug deeper, he uncovered references to one Harlan Voss, a code name that cropped up in old intelligence memos from the Cold War era. The name was associated with a rumored wet work operative who performed sanctioned assassinations too sensitive for official MI6 records. The memos alluded to Section W, an alleged covert division rumored to handle tasks the government would never admit to. The name Voss was always whispered with fear or awe, signifying a lethal asset who seldom left traces. Elliot was careful not to leap to conclusions, but the more he read, the more uneasy he became. The descriptions of Voss's modus operandi, staged accidents, minimal ballistic evidence, matched the bizarre mishaps that befell the individuals on Arthur's list. Marlene listened to Elliot's reports, feeling as though her world was cracking apart. She found herself recalling small details from their marriage. How Arthur once reflexively disarmed a drunk man who stumbled into the library, grabbing his arm with surprising precision and calm. Or the time a window shattered and Arthur responded with lightning-quick reflexes, dragging her to safety. She'd laughed it off as a fluke. Now she wondered if all those little behaviors were glimpses of training he never divulged. The final blow came when Elliot managed to find a grainy surveillance photo in a digital archive. The photo dated back to 1973, showing a battered embassy building in West Berlin after an explosion. A man in a coat left the scene, head turned so only half his face was visible. Yet the shape of the jaw, the receding hairline, the stoic posture, unmistakably Arthur's. The caption read, "Asset Voss terminated protocol after refusing Target 9. Initiated unplanned identity burial. Status: burned." Elliot, reading from the partial documents, said it indicated the asset effectively faked his own death or vanished from official rosters after refusing a certain mission. The code phrase identity burial suggested a new cover, new name, or new life. Could that have been the moment Arthur turned from being Harlan Voss the assassin to Arthur the mild English retiree? Marlene trembled, tears slipping down her cheeks. The man she shared a bed with for 52 years was a ghost, a persona created to hide a lethal operative's identity. She felt anger, betrayal, and confusion swirl within her. She wanted answers, but the only person who could provide them was dead. Her memories were tainted now with the suspicion that every gesture of kindness might have been overshadowed by guilt or necessity. Was their entire marriage a cover? Or had he loved her truly? In a desperate bid for clarity, Elliot found a lead. A woman named Marion Bell, rumored to have once been an intelligence handler. She was living in Berlin under a protective arrangement. The newly uncovered reference to terminated protocol might connect to her. After many calls, strings pulled, and hushed favors, he located Marion's contact information. But Marion would speak only to Marlene alone, and only if Marlene came to Berlin in person. Elliot was wary. It sounded dangerous. But Marlene felt compelled to face the truth, even if it meant traveling for the first time outside England in decades. She steeled herself, determined to walk in Arthur's footsteps if it meant unraveling the secrets. With Elliot's assistance, Marlene made the journey. The flight to Berlin was nerve-wracking. She was unaccustomed to the hustle of airports and security checks. She arrived feeling exhausted but resolute. Marion had arranged to meet her in a small cafe in a quiet neighborhood. Marlene recognized Marion the moment she walked in. A tall, older woman with alert eyes that seemed to scan the room for threats. They sat at a corner table, the hush between them throbbing with tension. Marion began by asking if Marlene was sure she wanted to hear the truth. Marlene, close to tears, said she needed to. So Marion explained that many years ago, she served as a mid-level intelligence officer in Section W, known only to a handful. Arthur, whose codename was Harlan Voss, was the best assassin she had ever managed. Precise, calm, never rattled by the moral weight of their missions. He had carried out dozens of kills, each meticulously staged to look like an accident or a natural cause. On the desk in front of them, Marion placed a thin dossier. "Your Arthur," she said softly, "was the most skilled agent I ever met, but he walked away from it all after refusing the 9th target on a list of high-value kills." Marlene felt her stomach lurch. She recalled the list in Arthur's tin. 10 names, each with a date, but only 7 crossed out. Target 9 had not been crossed out. Marion revealed the code name for that target: Skylark. The intelligence was that Skylark was a significant threat, but to Arthur it was a step too far. Skylark was just a teenager, someone rumored to hold or eventually acquire critical information from a defector. The higher-ups ordered Arthur to neutralize the threat, but he refused. He said, "I won't become what we fight." After that, Marion explained, he had to vanish. He faked the end of Harlan Voss and created a new identity. The burn status was the official note that the asset was out of the game, with no intention of returning. Tears welled in Marlene's eyes. She almost wanted to feel relief that he refused to kill a child, that the man she loved did have moral lines. But at the same time, her chest constricted with the knowledge that he'd still been a trained killer who ended at least 7 lives. She asked in a small voice, "Why did he marry me? Was I just cover?" Marion's eyes flickered with sympathy. She said that Arthur Harland had spoken often about a librarian he met in an English town, about how she had a kindness in her that made him believe he could still be good. Marion insisted that, from everything she observed, he truly loved Marlene, using that love as his anchor to leave the darkness behind. But it wasn't a simple story. They parted ways with Marion pressing a final piece of the puzzle into Marlene's hands. A dossier labeled Operation W, Target List. It contained short profiles of each name on the kill list. Some were double agents, war criminals, dangerous defectors who threatened to compromise Britain's fragile post-war security. The second page held only a code name for Skylark, but no details on identity. Marion's parting words were a warning that knowledge of these missions could still endanger Marlene if certain people learned she possessed it. The best course was to let sleeping dogs lie. Yet something gnawed at Marlene. She recognized a name in the margins referencing cousin of subject's spouse. Realization crashed over her. Skylark was her cousin, Caroline. The puzzle pieces locked into place. Caroline's father had been a Soviet chemist who defected, bringing a teenage daughter into a precarious environment. Caroline vanished from family gatherings around that time, rumored to be traveling. Marlene never heard from her again. Now she suspected that Caroline had become entangled in intelligence games far beyond her comprehension. Arthur's refusal to kill her was the reason he walked away. Reeling with that revelation, Marlene felt a wave of heartbreak for both Caroline and Arthur. Had Caroline died anyway, or gone into hiding? No one in the family had spoken of her in decades. And Arthur, choosing to defy the kill order, had upended his entire life. It reconfigured every assumption Marlene held about their relationship. He might have married her to place a protective ring around her extended family, ensuring no official directive ever came down to harm them again. But it also might have been genuine love, perhaps a combination of both. Traveling back to England, Marlene felt as though her head were spinning with 100 questions. She dreaded explaining any of this to Elliot, who was waiting anxiously for her return. Yet upon landing, Elliot greeted her with his own discovery. He had found a photograph tucked within some newly accessed records. A snapshot of Arthur standing in front of an orphanage in Austria, holding the hand of a small boy who looked about 4 or 5. Elliot recognized the boy as his father, James, who had grown up believing he was adopted by Arthur during a business trip to Vienna in the 1970s. James never questioned the official story. He had no memory of earlier years, and Arthur always said it was a fortunate arrangement that brought James into their family. Marlene had accepted that tale at face value, never suspecting a hidden dimension. Now Elliot pointed to a note scrawled on the back of the photograph. Found the boy. Fulfilling promise. The date corresponded to a time Arthur told Marlene he was traveling for some personal errands. Elliot concluded that the child was the orphaned son of Skylark, Caroline, who had been captured or killed by Soviet agents. Arthur, spurred by guilt or loyalty, rescued the boy. That was Elliot's father. Thus, in a tragic twist, Marlene realized her adopted son was actually her cousin's grandchild, or something akin to that, bridging a bizarre family link. Arthur had quietly integrated the boy into their household, shielding him from the fate that befell his mother. Marlene felt battered by the revelations, but a small note of comfort arose. Arthur's compassion was evident. He might have been a killer, but he also refused to kill a child and took steps to save an orphan boy from a brutal fate. At the same time, the sense of betrayal cut deep. He'd made monumental decisions in her life without her knowledge. Did he not trust her with the truth? In the weeks that followed, Marlene grew quiet and pensive, often staring into space, as Elliot tried to be supportive. She decided not to tell James everything. It would shatter his identity. Instead, she merely hinted that Arthur had once rescued a child under dire circumstances. James, always grateful for the love Arthur showed him, accepted the partial truth without probing too deeply. Perhaps he sensed that prying further would unearth painful secrets. Yet another unexpected note arrived from Marion, delivered through a circuitous route. It contained an envelope with Arthur's handwriting, dated 1993, addressed to Marlene, only if she demands the truth. She opened it with trembling hands. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And I've kept too much from you except one thing. My love for you was always genuine. I chose you because I loved you, and I stayed because life without you was unimaginable. I carried terrible burdens, did terrible things, but when I held James, I thought perhaps I could finally bury that past. I never stopped being yours, but I was never only yours. The letter ended with a short line. I am sorry. I hope one day you might forgive me. Tears streamed down Marlene's cheeks as she held the paper. She recalled the gentle man who hummed old jazz tunes while washing dishes, who always made sure to place a fresh rose in a vase every Sunday. She recognized that Arthur's devotion to her was real, even as he withheld the darkest corners of his life. She found a bittersweet sense of closure reading his words, understanding that he never intended to make her part of his violent secrets. By keeping her in ignorance, he probably spared her from potential retaliation or the guilt of complicity. Finally, there was one more journey to be made. Deep in that final dossier from Marion lay a clue to a place in Berlin by the River Spree where Arthur had apparently stood at a pivotal moment, deciding to vanish from the intelligence world. Marlene, with Elliot's encouragement, returned to Berlin one last time. She found that spot, a deserted embankment overshadowed by industrial buildings. She stood by the water, a cold wind cutting across her cheeks, feeling the resonance of Arthur's presence. She carried the list of 10 names, the old dossier, and the pictures all in a small satchel. She removed them carefully, one by one. She recalled each name that Arthur had ended with the stroke of an assassin's skill, the final 3 names left undone, including Skylark. She thought about the life he built with her, their quiet evenings, the gentle kisses goodnight. With trembling resolve, she lit a small fire in a makeshift metal pan she had brought and fed the documents to the flames. The paper curled and blackened, smoke rising into the gray Berlin sky. She did not do it out of condemnation, but out of mercy. Those secrets belonged to Arthur and the ghosts of the Cold War. Let them rest in ashes. As the last ember died, Marlene felt a weight lift. She might never fully reconcile the sweet, tender Arthur with the lethal operative Harlan Voss. But she believed him when he wrote that his love was genuine. Some part of him had hung onto that love as an anchor, preventing him from completing the final kill, refusing to murder a girl who had done nothing but be born to the wrong father. He had chosen to live in obscurity and peace, forging a new identity so thoroughly that even she, his wife, never suspected. The question of forgiveness gnawed at her. She found that she could not hate him despite the lies. He had done monstrous things but also acts of deep compassion. Could a soul be that contradictory? Possibly yes. Possibly that was the truth of him. A man with blood on his hands but devotion in his heart. Returning home, Marlene quietly rejoined her routines. She never told James the full extent, only that Arthur had once saved him from a dire fate, that the story was complicated by old politics. James accepted it, content in the knowledge that he'd been wanted, protected, and loved. Elliot, for his part, wrote a private account of the discoveries, carefully omitting or changing names. He recognized the explosive nature of the secrets and respected Marlene's wish for privacy. She confided only in him that Arthur's final note asked for forgiveness. The days turned into months. On certain evenings, Marlene would sit in Arthur's study, feeling the ghost of him in the stillness. She would glance at the fireplace where she once found the tin, remembering the list. She could almost see him perched in the armchair, reading yet another spy novel, ironically so close to his own life story. She might flick on a jazz record, recalling how he'd close his eyes to savor the saxophone's wail. She felt pangs of longing for the simple illusions of their marriage before the truth was exposed, yet also a sense of deeper respect for the complexities he navigated. She concluded that there were no easy answers, that love could coexist with guilt, and truth could cause heartbreak as well as healing. She told Elliot once, in a halting voice, that if Arthur had confided in her, she might have tried to stop him from finishing his missions. That might have compromised everything. She understood that by not knowing, she was safer, and ironically so was he. Over time, she made peace with that arrangement. Occasionally, James or Elliot would ask if she still had regrets. She would only smile sadly, reply that she had a half-century of companionship that was real in its own way. She remembered the way Arthur's eyes lit up when she walked into a room, or how he never forgot her birthday. That love was no less authentic because it coexisted with lethal secrets. She supposed that was the tragedy of their story. He had no other path if he wanted to keep her out of harm's way. By the next spring, the house felt more at peace. The study door open, the fireplace regularly cleaned. Marlene placed fresh flowers on the mantel, thinking it was the kind of gentle beauty Arthur used to appreciate. She even found a quiet sense of closure when she visited Colin Redford's grave, leaving a small bouquet. Though she never said it aloud, she was silently apologizing on Arthur's behalf for the life he took. Maybe it meant nothing to the dead, but it eased her conscience a fraction. In a final act of acceptance, Marlene gathered mementos of her marriage, a wedding photograph, postcards from a few short trips they took, the ring Arthur gave her for their 20th anniversary. She placed them in a small trunk in the attic. Among them, she included Arthur's last note, the one about loving her truly yet never being only hers. It felt right that all these tokens be kept together, forming a mosaic of a life that was simultaneously ordinary and extraordinary. If someone in a future generation stumbled upon the trunk, they might piece together parts of the story, though never fully. Sometimes, as she dozed in her armchair by the window, Marlene dreamed of Arthur. In the dream, he wore a simple overcoat, his face shadowed but smiling at her. She would ask him, "Why didn't you tell me?" And he'd fade away, leaving behind only the faint scent of gunmetal and old books. She'd awaken with tears, but also with a soft acceptance that she might never get an answer beyond the one she had. He chose love over the mission, and that forced him to carry secrets to his grave. In her final year, Marlene found a quiet serenity. She believed that while the story was tragic, it did not negate the tenderness they shared. He had been two men in one life, but the man who played jazz records and kissed her goodnight was real. She kept those memories close, letting them soothe the raw edges of betrayal. She even wrote a brief letter of her own, addressed to Arthur in a small notebook. "I do not know all your sins, nor can I absolve them, but I know your heart. You refused to kill that girl and you saved a child instead. You created a life for us and for James. You gave me love, though burdened by shadows. I will carry your secrets gently, for I loved you all the same." She tucked the letter into the trunk, sealing it with a sense of finality. The secrets might remain in the hush of their home, known only to a few. No official medal would be pinned to Arthur's name. No public memorial would celebrate the moral line he refused to cross. But in her mind, at least, he was recognized for the man he became. A flawed soul who turned away from darkness in the end. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already and subscribe for more.